At my brother's wedding, my father raised his glass and said, "Army girls are great until they think they can lead men." The room laughed. I didn't. Neither did the 5 men in tailored suits at the head table. They stood. They saluted. Not my father, not the groom. Me. My father's brand new iPhone 16 slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. That's when the silence grew teeth. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. If you've ever been dismissed by the people who should have stood beside you first, stay with me. You're not alone. This story is yours too. Caroline Hart stood in front of the mirror, the navy blue dress hugging her frame with more structure than comfort. The neckline dipped modestly, the fabric smooth against skin that had known more Kevlar than silk. Her shoulders, squared by years of discipline, made the dress look more like a uniform than an evening gown. 38 years old, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she didn't belong in her own skin. The woman in the reflection looked polished, presentable, even pretty, but behind the eyes was someone bracing for impact. She glanced down at her phone. A new message flashed on the screen. "Don't be late." That was it. No greeting, no "can't wait to see you." Just a command, sharp and short, from her father, the same tone he used to use when telling her to rake leaves or shut up at the dinner table. Some things never changed, apparently. Behind her, the sound of silverware clinking echoed faintly from the rehearsal dinner downstairs. Caroline took a steadying breath, pinning back a loose strand of hair. The bun was tight, precise. Her military habits died hard, and for good reason. They were the only habits that had ever served her. There was a knock. Her mother, Linda, peeked in. "They're setting out the centerpieces. Could use some help," she said, not quite meeting Caroline's eyes. "I'll be right there," Caroline answered, voice even. Linda hesitated, like she wanted to say more, but then retreated. The door clicked shut, and with it went the moment. Downstairs the house buzzed in a soft kind of chaos. Cousins laughed too loudly. Aunt Teresa barked directions about flowers as if she were commanding an orchestra. Caroline moved through it like a ghost, present, visible, but somehow untouchable. She offered to help fold programs, but her mother had already handed the task to a niece. She tried to help with escort cards, but was waved off. Every role had been filled except hers. Jacob, the groom, her younger brother by 5 years, broke from a group and approached her with his usual easy smile. "You clean up good, Captain," he teased, nudging her lightly on the shoulder. "Captain Hart reporting for awkward family obligations," she replied, forcing a grin. He laughed, then leaned closer. "Hey, did you know Dad's planning to speak tomorrow? Like, a full speech?" Caroline blinked. "No, he didn't mention it." Jacob frowned. "Weird, I figured he would have run it by you. You know how he gets." She didn't answer. She knew exactly how Charles Hart got. Twist knife, twist again. Later that evening, as people milled about checking seating assignments, Caroline wandered over to the printed chart near the staircase. Dozens of names printed in gold calligraphy under Table 1, Table 2. Her eyes scanned downward. Table 10, Caroline Hart. She paused. Table 10 wasn't with family. It was near the kitchen doors, practically in a service alley. The rest of the Hart family were grouped at tables 1 through 3. She double-checked. Surely this was a mistake, but there it was in neat ink, Barrett, Nguyen, Ramos, her name nestled among them. Her heart dropped, not in anger, but in that quiet ache that's worse. It wasn't an oversight, it was a choice. Linda passed by, arms full of napkins. Caroline tried to catch her eye, but her mother shifted her gaze, pretending not to see. She kept walking. A familiar weight settled in Caroline's chest, heavier than her medals, colder than battlefield air. Even here, even now, she was still the outsider. The last time Caroline remembered truly vanishing in a room was her cousin's graduation party. She was 15. The women in the family wore pearls and floral dresses. Caroline wore jeans and a t-shirt with mud on the hem from a softball game she'd just won. She'd shown up straight from the field, cheeks flushed, trophy in hand, ready to share something. Her father stood near the buffet, a beer in one hand and a voice louder than necessary. Someone had asked about her future plans. Caroline, he said, grinning like the setup of a joke. She wants to go play soldier. You know, fight wars with lipstick and heels. The laughter around him was sharp, not cruel, but careless. People laughed because it was easy, because no one expected to be corrected. Caroline had stood frozen, the trophy suddenly heavier in her arms, her pride melting under the heat of his words. Her mother had said nothing, just rearranged cutlery on a nearby table. That moment buried itself deep. It didn't leave bruises, but it shaped everything that came after. Back in the present, Caroline heard the shuffle of familiar boots, polished now, but still worn with a soldier's posture. She turned to see Ramos, Nguyen and Barrett enter the side door of the hall. They weren't in uniform, but they didn't need to be. You could spot men who'd seen war the way you could smell rain before it fell. They didn't wave, they didn't smile, but their eyes found hers and held just long enough. Caroline nodded once, so did they. The bond didn't need language, they took their places quietly at table 10. Nguyen ran a finger along the edge of his napkin, meticulous as ever. Barrett surveyed the exits without thinking. Ramos cracked his knuckles and leaned back in his chair like it was a Humvee seat. No one talked much. They didn't have to. Eventually Ramos broke the silence. Jacob looked nervous. He always looks nervous when Aunt Teresa talks to him, Caroline said dryly. Nguyen gave the faintest chuckle. Barrett leaned in. He wanted you to be a part of the bridal party, you know. She blinked. What? Best woman, honour guard. Something that made sense, he said, eyes on her. But your dad nixed it, called it distracting. Said weddings weren't places for uniforms or politics. Ramos snorted. Funny how your service became political once you started outranking him in more than name. The words stung more than she'd expected. Not because they were wrong, but because they were right. Caroline leaned back, letting her gaze drift towards the main dining area. Her father stood at the far end, sipping from a glass and gesturing animatedly to a group of Jacob's friends, laughing, commanding the room. Still the centre. Always. Barrett's voice softened. He didn't just block you from the bridal party. He asked the DJ not to introduce you during the welcome toast. Caroline stared ahead. Of course he did. The pain didn't burn anymore. It calcified. We wanted to push back, Nguyen said, quiet but firm. Jacob told us not to, said it would just cause more tension, but we didn't forget. There was a pause. Then Ramos added, we don't salute people because of rank, not really. We salute because of who they are when the bullets start flying. Caroline said nothing, just clenched the edge of her chair until her knuckles paled. Outside, the wind rustled the hedges. Inside, beneath warm lights and white linens, the real battle lines were already drawn. Caroline had always run faster than the boys her age. At 10, she could throw a football in a perfect spiral and outrun every kid in her grade. Her reflexes were sharp, her coordination natural. While other girls played with dolls, she practiced pitching with the garage door as her catcher. It wasn't rebellion, it was instinct. Her body knew what it liked before her mind had to explain it. But Charles Hart didn't like explaining things. When her PE teacher called home to recommend Caroline try out for the junior county track team, her father's face went flat. No words, just a long breath through his nose. That Saturday, a brand new pair of ballet slippers appeared on her bed. Every girl needs grace, he said at dinner, and discipline. Sports teach girls to be loud and sweaty. Ballet teaches control, poise. Caroline wanted to scream. She wanted to ask what he thought sports had given her. Teamwork, stamina, resilience. But she knew better. His mind wasn't a door. It was a wall. Do I have to? She asked, voice small. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. You'll go, he said, without looking up from his plate. She turned to her mother, hoping for a flicker of rescue. But Linda just refilled the gravy boat, not meeting her eyes. That silence hurt more than the ballet slippers ever would. The studio smelled like floor polish and fake roses. Caroline felt like a fraud in pink tights and a leotard, surrounded by delicate girls who pirouetted like music boxes. Her muscles ached, not from strain, but suppression. The wrong kind of movement. She did it for weeks, months. She got decent. Not good, not joyful, just decent. Enough to avoid comment. Enough to get by. One night, the dog barked. Max, the family's black lab, startled by thunder. Caroline, already in bed, heard the commotion downstairs. The bark, then her father's shout, then the snap of something. Belt, leash, she couldn't tell. She crept to the landing. Her father's shadow moved across the foyer. Max whimpered, low and broken. The sound hollowed something inside her. He hit the dog for being afraid. That was when the chill took hold of her. Not the kind that made you shiver. The kind that stays even under 100 blankets. She never looked at her father the same again. Years later, she'd think back to Max, to how the dog never barked again after that night, and how, in a way, neither did she. The twist came in 6th grade. Caroline's gym coach called her aside after class. He held a form, his expression cautious but hopeful. There's a regional sports programme, scholarship-based. They pick 10 girls statewide for elite track development. I nominated you. They're interested. Her heart surged. I just need your parents to sign. She brought the form home, careful not to wrinkle it, set it on the kitchen table, waited. Charles read it in silence. When he finished, he folded it in half and set it aside. We're not doing this. But it's paid. It's a huge opportunity. It's not about the money, he said. It's about the image. What kind of family pushes their daughter into locker rooms and bus rides with boys? People talk, Caroline. It's not like that, she said, her voice cracking. Exactly, he snapped. It's not up for discussion. And that was that. The form disappeared. The coach never brought it up again. She didn't cry, not then, not in front of him. But that night, alone in her room, she laced up her old sneakers and stared out the window. The moonlight painted the yard silver. She ran 10 laps around the backyard until her lungs burned. Then she ran 5 more. She never stopped running. Puberty was supposed to be the great equalizer, everyone awkward, everyone unsure. But for Caroline, it was a spotlight. Her shoulders stayed broad, her voice held weight. While other girls whispered about boys, she memorised the cadence of military marches under her breath. It wasn't that she hated being a girl. She hated being told what kind of girl to be. At a family reunion when she was 13, she wore a dark blue dress, plain, loose, chosen by her mother. She'd paired it with sneakers instead of flats because she was supposed to help with setup. Halfway through the day, her older cousin, a smirking 17-year-old with too much gel in his hair, looked her up and down and said loudly, "You look like a boy trying to play dress-up." Laughter followed, from cousins, from uncles. And then the most painful sound of all, her father's chuckle. "Don't be mean," he said, but he was still smiling. Caroline stood there, cheeks burning, the insult already sinking like gravel into wet cement. She waited for someone, anyone, to speak up. Her mother busied herself unwrapping silverware. Her aunt changed the subject, and just like that, it was over for them, but not for her. That was the day she learned silence could be as sharp as a slap. By 15, Caroline had made up her mind. She read everything she could about enlistment, about basic training, about the difference between ROTC and direct enlistment. She ran every morning before school, did push-ups in the dark while her family slept. She kept it secret, not out of shame, but survival. Her junior year, she signed up for the military placement exam, using her school counsellor's help. Her scores came back high, very high. A recruiter visited. They spoke in hushed tones in the back of the guidance office. Caroline didn't flinch once. She brought home the paperwork the week before her 17th birthday. When she placed the manila envelope on the kitchen counter, her father barely looked up. "This a joke?" he asked, thumbing through the pages. "No," she said, "it's my choice." "You think you're going to carry a rifle, lead men?" "If I'm trained and capable, yes." He laughed once, sharp and small. "They'll stick you in an office. That's what the army does with girls. Filing cabinets and coffee runs." Her mother hovered near the doorway, visibly uncomfortable, folding a dish towel over and over. "I'm fine with an office if it's part of the mission," Caroline replied, voice steady. Her father leaned back. "The mission is killing bad guys, Caroline. Paperwork doesn't win wars." She didn't reply, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she knew it wouldn't matter. His mind was made of stone. She wasn't going to chip her way through it in one night. She signed the papers herself. Her 18th birthday was 6 months away. She could wait. When the day finally came, she packed 2 duffel bags, printed her itinerary, and stood by the front door at 4:45 a.m., her rideshare arriving in 10 minutes. No one else was awake, except her mother. Linda appeared in the hallway in slippers and a robe, eyes red but not crying. "You sure?" she whispered. "I've never been more sure of anything," Caroline said. Her mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. She didn't hug her. She just stepped aside. Years later, Caroline would learn the truth. From her aunt, after a few too many glasses of wine at another reunion. "Your mum begged him," she said, "to drive you, to go with you to the airport, just to say goodbye." And? He said no, told her, "We don't reward mistakes, we don't encourage the wrong path." Caroline didn't react, didn't blink, just nodded. She'd always known the truth. Now she had the words for it. The sand in Missouri was a different kind of cruel. It stuck to everything. Your teeth, your socks, your soul. Fort Leonard Wood wasn't a place for comfort. It was where comfort went to die. The days began before dawn and ended long after the sun had dipped behind trees that looked like they'd been held hostage by wind and cold. Caroline's first week of basic training left her blistered, bruised and sore in places she hadn't known could ache. Every muscle screamed. Her skin peeled from sunburns. Her throat went raw from shouting cadences. And her eyes, they stayed dry. Because crying didn't help you pass inspections. It just made salt. She learned quickly that silence was her armour. When the drill sergeant barked at her for moving a half-second late, she didn't flinch. When a fellow recruit muttered "princess" under his breath during ruck march, she didn't bite. Not then. But silence wasn't immunity. During a night exercise, navigating a mock combat field under starlight and stress, she twisted her ankle on a root hidden beneath the gravel. She fell hard, hands out, chin grazing rock. Blood. Not a lot, but enough. One of the trainers rushed over. "You're done," he said. "Med tent. You sit out the rest." "I'm fine," she said, standing, wincing but holding her posture. He scoffed. "Your pride is fine, your ankle isn't." I said, "I'm fine, Staff Sergeant." That was the first time she earned a nickname, not from the other recruits, from him. Captain Stubborn, he called her for the rest of the month. He didn't mean it kindly. It didn't matter. A week later, she sliced her forearm during a live drill. Barbed wire tore through the skin just above her elbow. The medic grabbed her. "We need to numb it," he said. "No time," she snapped, staring at the field. "You're bleeding." "I can still shoot." He stitched her up with shaking hands. She didn't. That night she slept on gravel. Her blanket was thin. Her thoughts were heavier than the rucksack, but she slept. Because exhaustion was an equalizer. The men in her unit didn't hate her, but they didn't trust her either, at least not at first. They waited, watched, assumed she'd crack, but crack she didn't. 3 weeks into training, she clocked the fastest time on the obstacle course, vaulted over walls, belly crawled under fire, scaled rope ladders like she'd been born climbing. When she landed on the final platform, boots solid and breath steady, the watching officers went quiet. Even the drill sergeant raised an eyebrow. The next morning, her name was at the top of the duty rotation, leadership training detail. That same week, she had her first true confrontation. Second Lieutenant Darrell, lean, sharp-jawed and loudly sceptical of co-ed command structures, called her out during briefing. "Private Hart, do you think you can lead, or just perform?" It was bait, public, sharp and deliberate. She took it. "I think I've already led," she said, "and I've outperformed half this room." A few recruits inhaled sharply. One choked on his coffee. Darrell narrowed his eyes. Confidence noted. "You'd better back it up." And she did. She led her unit in a mock hostage extraction 2 days later. Got her team through with the lowest time and 0 penalties. When Darrell reviewed the tapes, he said nothing, just signed the score sheet and walked away. Weeks passed. The distance between her and the others shrank. Not from words, but from sweat. From seeing her carry gear for the smaller guys without being asked. From her silence when others bragged. From the way she stood up for the private who stuttered during formation call. By the end of the training cycle, they weren't just standing with her. They were standing behind her. The twist came weeks after graduation, when Caroline received a notice to report for her first permanent post. On the orders was a familiar name, Lieutenant Darrell. Same man, same eyes. But this time he didn't challenge her. He called her into his office and handed her a sealed envelope. "You've been recommended for platoon leadership rotation," he said. "Someone has to fill the slot next month. I nominated you." Caroline blinked. "You did?" He nodded. "I was wrong. You don't just hold the line, you define it." It wasn't praise. Not exactly, but it was enough. She saluted, took the envelope and left the office with her jaw set and her stride steady. Captain Stubborn no more, just Captain. Promotion came quietly. There were no parades, no confetti, just a room full of worn boots, a printed memo and a firm handshake from her CO. Caroline was now officially a squad leader, one of the youngest in her division, and the only woman in her company to hold the position. She didn't celebrate. She trained harder. The responsibility sat heavy but familiar on her shoulders. She memorised her unit's medical records, sleep cycles and bad habits. She drilled them until they cursed her under their breath, and then again until they stopped cursing at all. They didn't love her, but they respected her, which was better. "Cold as a goddamn snowman," Ramos muttered one night during ruck check. Nguyen grinned. "She's not cold, she's concentrated." "She's our Ice Queen," Barrett added, unshakable. The nickname stuck, Ice Queen, sometimes the Major as a joke, even though she hadn't reached that rank. And behind her back, only sometimes, they called her Boss Lady, Vietnamese slang that Nguyen taught the others. It roughly meant Boss Lady. Caroline never corrected them. She didn't need warmth, she needed clarity. Command wasn't about being liked, it was about being followed, especially when the bullets started flying. Still, every time she earned another stripe, another commendation, she wrote home. Always handwritten, always neat. "Dear Dad, dear Mom, I was promoted today, squad leader. I'm leading 12 men in my unit now. We're scheduled for more advanced combat readiness next week. Hope you're well. Love, Caroline." No reply. "Dear Dad, dear Mom, we had a surprise inspection. I led prep and passed with full marks. I'm doing okay. Tell Jacob I hope college is going well. Love, Caroline." No reply. "Dear Dad, dear Mom." "They're sending me overseas next quarter. Training intensifies. It's hard, but I'm proud. Just wanted to say I'm thinking of you. Love, Caroline." Nothing. It wasn't silence. It was absence. She never expected applause, but even acknowledgement would have been something. The letters kept going. 3 a year, then 2, eventually just 1. One afternoon, 6 months into her leadership rotation, Caroline found herself alone in the barracks. Most of her squad was on weekend rotation. She'd just returned from a strategy seminar and was reviewing notes, half distracted by the sound of a game playing in another wing. On impulse, she picked up her phone, dialed home. The line rang twice before connecting. There was a pause, then a voice. "Hello?" Her father. She froze. "Hi," she said, "it's me." Silence. She waited. "Dad?" She heard breathing, a slow exhale, and then nothing. No words, just a long, hollow breath. Then the line clicked. Call ended. Caroline stared at the screen. It hadn't been rage or shame. It was worse than both. It was indifference. That call haunted her for weeks. Not because of what wasn't said, but because she realised there was nothing left to say. She buried the sting deep and doubled her training load, started mentoring 2 junior squads, taught rookies how to secure perimeters, how to spot hidden IEDs, how to keep a clear head when everything screamed chaos. The young ones watched her like a hawk. They never said it aloud, but the way they stood straighter when she entered, the way their questions always started with "Mom, if you don't mind," told her everything. They didn't fear her, they relied on her. That was enough. Her CO pulled her aside one day after a field exercise. "You're building loyalty, the kind you can't teach in manuals." "I just hold the standard," she said. He smiled, "and they rise to meet it." That night in her bunk, she stared at the ceiling, one hand resting on her stomach, the other holding a photo Jacob had sent, the only one ever, a blurry selfie of him and his fiancée at a college football game. Caroline didn't cry, not because she didn't feel anything, but because this too was familiar. She reached for a pen and notebook, started a new letter, not to her parents, to Jacob. The desert didn't scream. It whispered. Whispers that hid in shifting winds, in the shimmer of heat over sand, in the silence that came before something exploded. Caroline had learned to listen for what wasn't there. Crickets gone quiet, radios fizzing with static, the way her squad's boots changed rhythm when fear took hold. That morning, they were scheduled for a routine convoy, 4 vehicles, clear route, no intel of insurgent activity. But routine was a lie the desert never respected. The blast took out the second vehicle, not fireball spectacular, just a muted boom and dust geyser, the sound of earth cracking open. Caroline ducked before the echo fully hit. She shouted for positions, radioed backup, swept her eyes across the scene. Barrett and Nguyen were in the lead vehicle with her. They were fine, but the last truck was pinned. Its axle torn, 2 men trapped in the back, one screaming. The middle vehicle smoked, unmoving. Her team hesitated, trained but young. The kind of young that hadn't yet seen how fast death rearranges a plan. "We pull back," one shouted. "No," Caroline snapped, "we move." She didn't wait for debate. She moved fast and low, circling through a dry creek bed flanking the road. It was a risk, one she calculated in seconds. Better angles, less exposed, but no guarantees. Barrett followed first, then Nguyen, then one by one, the rest. They reached the wreckage under cover of dust and adrenaline. Caroline climbed into the blown truck, ignoring the heat curling off twisted metal. One soldier was wedged under a broken seat, bleeding badly from his leg. "I got you," she said, sliding beneath him. "Ma'am," he choked, "don't." "I said, I've got you." Barrett lifted from the other side. Together they pulled him out. His boot left a trail of blood behind. When the last man was pulled clear, Caroline covered their retreat, rifle up, heart calm. Later, when the medevac arrived and silence settled in again, the younger soldier grabbed her sleeve. "You're like—" He struggled for words, wincing. "Battle mum. You don't yell. You show up." She blinked, unsure whether to laugh or correct him. "Get better," was all she said. The phrase stuck. For weeks after, her squad called her Battle Mum behind her back. Not mocking, almost reverent, like they'd discovered something ancient. That night, around the fireless camp, Barrett handed her an energy bar and said, "You saved their lives." Caroline shrugged. "That's the job." "No," Nguyen said, unwrapping his ration. "The job is keeping us alive, but you didn't just save them. You made the call no one else could have." She didn't respond, but inside something eased. Later that week, Private Hale, tall, lean, always fidgeting, knocked on her tent pole. She nodded for him to enter. "Mum," he began, looking everywhere but at her. "I was going to put him for a transfer. Before the mission." Caroline raised an eyebrow. "Didn't think I could cut it. Didn't think this place fit. And now?" He met her eyes. "I'm staying because of you." Twist, sharp and unexpected, not from rank but from belief. "Then earn your place," she said, not unkindly. "Yes, ma'am." As he left, she let the tent flap fall closed behind him. In the quiet, under the fabric and the weight of war, she allowed herself one small breath of pride. Then it was gone, because tomorrow the desert would whisper again. The ceremony was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon, quiet, efficient, nothing flashy, just the way Caroline preferred it. She had earned a Bronze Star for leadership under fire. The paperwork said exceptional bravery. She remembered it as just doing her job. The base commander offered to organise a formal recognition, a speech, a folded flag, even a catered lunch. Caroline declined most of it. "Sir," she said, voice steady, "I'd rather the funds go to our supply budget. Or morale packs for the new guys." He blinked, then nodded. "You'll still need to be there," he added. "Even heroes have to pose for photos." She didn't argue, but she also didn't invite half the base, only those who'd bled with her, and her family, just in case. The letter she sent home was typed, formal, respectful. She addressed it to both parents. "Dear Mum and Dad, there will be a small ceremony next week at base. I'm receiving a Bronze Star. It would mean a lot if you could come. I know it's not easy, but I wanted you to have the chance to be there. No pressure, just hope." Love, Caroline. She didn't expect a reply. But hope, she had learned, was a habit. The day of the event, she wore her dress uniform. Crisp creases, polished boots, the commendation pinned high on her chest. Ramos adjusted her collar before she stepped outside. "You good?" he asked. "Always," she answered. Nguyen and Barrett flanked her as they entered the briefing hall. Chairs filled with familiar faces, people who knew the cost behind the ribbon. The applause was respectful, short, genuine. The commander read her citation. A few lines about bravery, coordination, lives saved. She shook his hand, accepted the certificate, smiled politely for the photo. Then it was over. No cheers, no flowers, and no family. She went back to her quarters, peeled off the uniform, and folded it like it was sacred. Later that night, Nguyen knocked. "Thought you might want this," he said, handing her a manila envelope. Inside were handwritten notes, each one from a member of her unit. Short messages, simple words, but everyone carved something real into her chest. "I made it home because of you. Best damn leader I've had. You didn't just give orders, you gave us purpose." That was the celebration she hadn't asked for, but deeply needed. A week later, Caroline called home. The number rang to voicemail. Again, 3 days passed. No reply, no message. Then came the twist. Jacob called her, voice bright. "Hey, did you know Dad's been showing off my engagement photo to literally everyone? Even the grocery clerk?" Caroline smiled faintly. "That sounds about right. Yeah, he even had copies printed for the neighbours." A silence settled. "You okay?" Jacob asked. She hesitated. "I sent them an invitation to my award ceremony. Just thought they should have the option." Jacob paused. "When?" "A week before the event." Caroline, he never mentioned it." She already knew, but hearing it, confirmation, hit different. Jacob's voice dropped. "I was at the house last weekend, saw your envelope tucked under a pile of bills. It was unopened." Of course it was. She thanked him and ended the call. That night she opened her footlocker, tucked the commendation next to her discharge papers. On top of that, she placed the stack of handwritten notes from her team. If no one else remembered, she would. And if no one else honoured her, she already had. Caroline arrived at the venue early, as promised. She had told Jacob she'd be there before the florist, before the caterer, even before Aunt Teresa could start rearranging the centerpieces she wasn't in charge of. Her boots clicked against the tile, polished now, not military issue, but still hers. The hall was already humming with motion. Volunteers, vendors, cousins pretending to help, but mostly loitering around the donut table. Caroline scanned the room and offered a small wave to her mother, who was deep in conversation with 2 women from church. Linda met her daughter's eyes, nodded briefly, then turned away. Strike one. Caroline walked towards the reception Bibles. "Anything you need me to do?" she asked a woman in an event staff polo, who blinked at her like she'd interrupted a prayer. I think we're good," the woman said. "Maybe check with the family." She did, or tried to. Aunt Teresa gave her a box of napkin rings, then took it back, saying she'd already delegated that to her daughter. Her cousin Marcy was decorating the seating chart and claimed she needed an artistic eye. Implied, not Caroline's. A younger cousin waved awkwardly when Caroline approached, then said, "I think you're table 10, right?" and darted off. No one said it, but it was clear. She wasn't part of this machine. Not really. Still she stayed, picked up loose programmes, helped an elderly guest to their seat. Quiet contributions, invisible ones. The bride appeared just before noon, radiant even in slippers and curlers. Emily wasn't the kind of woman who needed attention. She earned affection by default. Caroline liked her. Always had. "Captain Hart," Emily greeted with a playful bow. "You clean up way too well for someone who could break down an M4 blindfolded." Caroline smiled. "You've been talking to Jacob." "Guilty." They shared a laugh. Emily's laughter was soft, sincere. "You need anything?" Caroline asked. Emily hesitated. "Actually, can we chat for a sec?" They stepped into a quieter hallway where sunlight spilled through the stained glass. "I just wanted to say how glad I am you're here," Emily said. "Jacob talks about you all the time. You're a force." Caroline inclined her head, unsure how to respond. Emily continued a bit more carefully. I know this wedding is big, complicated, a lot of family history. I just want today to feel safe for everyone. There it was, the pivot. Caroline knew that tone. Diplomatic, neutral, a kindness wrapped around caution. You mean for my father, Caroline said, voice even. Emily didn't deny it. He expressed some concerns. About what? Emily winced. About speeches. That maybe it would be best if certain topics didn't come up. Military things, emotional things. Caroline's jaw tightened, just slightly. He told you not to let me speak. Emily didn't reply, but her eyes said yes. Twist landed. Caroline let the silence stretch. I'm not here to hijack your wedding, she said, finally, or make a scene. I know that, Emily said quickly. Jacob knows that. But he doesn't know about this conversation, does he? Emily hesitated. No, your dad asked me not to bring it up with him, said it would stress him out before the vows. Caroline gave a short nod. It wasn't Emily's fault, but it was still a blow. She had survived ambushes, watched friends bleed out and stared down mortar fire without blinking, yet somehow being silenced at her own brother's wedding cut deeper. Thank you for telling me, she said. Emily reached for her hand, gave it a gentle squeeze. You're part of this family, Caroline, no matter what anyone says. But as Caroline stepped back into the reception room, past the flowers and white tablecloths, she wasn't sure she believed it. Caroline stood near the back of the reception hall, hands folded loosely in front of her, eyes tracing the steady movement of people filling seats, adjusting corsages, checking their reflections in windows polished too clean. The buzz of wedding day chatter surrounded her, familiar and distant all at once. It was the kind of hum that made people feel safe, included. She had long ago stopped expecting to feel that way. Her gaze swept across the hall until it landed on table 10. Ramos was already seated, tie loose but posture perfect. Barrett arrived next, nodding once when he saw her. Nothing theatrical, just confirmation. Nguyen followed, eyes scanning the exits out of habit, then pausing on her face. His nod came slower, more deliberate. Unspoken message delivered, we're here. The sight of them, their quiet certainty, their presence without fanfare, steadied something in Caroline that had begun to tilt. She moved towards their table, footsteps purposeful. No one stopped her. No one asked questions. As she reached the table, Barrett pulled out the empty chair beside him. Ma'am, he said simply. Barrett, she replied. Quite the seating plan. Ramos muttered under his breath, glancing at the kitchen doors a few feet away. I could throw a bread roll into the dish pit from here. Let's not start that tradition, Caroline said, the corner of her mouth lifting slightly. Nguyen handed her a glass of water, in case your blood's boiling. It's not, she said, just simmering. A beat passed. Then Ramos added, voice low but sharp, we see it, you're not alone. Caroline looked down at the tablecloth. Crisp linen, no place card for her, just a blank square where her name should have been. Jacob appeared like a ghost out of the crowd, face flushed from rushing between last-minute details. His suit was slightly rumpled, but his grin was real. Hey, he said, breathless, you made it. I said I would. I know, He exhaled. It means a lot, really. He looked over her shoulder at her table companions, then leaned in. You know they all requested to be seated with you, right? It was supposed to be different, but things got shuffled. Shuffled, Caroline echoed. Dad, he paused. He had opinions. Of course he did. Jacob winced. Look, I didn't agree with everything, but it's his house, his rules. You know how he gets. She nodded slowly. I know. His voice softened. For what it's worth, when I picture this day, you're always in it, not just present, important. Caroline met his eyes. He meant it. But he wasn't brave enough to say it out loud in front of their father. Not yet. She reached out, adjusted his crooked lapel. You'll make a good husband, she said. You already know when to say sorry, he laughed. You always did read people better than I could. As he walked away, Ramos leaned in, voice low. He's trying, but he's still under the old man's shadow. He's not the only one, Caroline murmured. Barrett, watching the crowd, spoke next. You know, when we came back from that last deployment, I thought you'd never want to be around civilians again. I didn't, she admitted. But this isn't about civilians, it's about family. Same thing, Nguyen said. One you're born into, one you build. There was a pause. Then Ramos added quietly, "We're going to do what he won't." Caroline looked up. "What do you mean?" Ramos gave the faintest smirk. "You'll see." She tried to press him, but Nguyen shook his head. "Let it happen, Mom. You've done enough." Caroline didn't like surprises, but something in their voices, steel wrapped in respect, made her stop asking questions. The music shifted. The MC's voice echoed through the hall, calling for guests to take their seats. Caroline took hers, spine straight, hands calm. Whatever was coming, she could handle it. She always had. The dinner plates were nearly cleared, and the buzz of the reception had softened to a warm lull. Glasses clinking, silverware scraped against china, murmurs of old friends catching up over wine. Caroline sat at table 10, watching the room with practised eyes. Nguyen was halfway through his second roll. Ramos toyed with the butter knife. Barrett sat unmoving, like he was still on patrol. And then, predictably, the tap of glass. Ting, ting, ting. Charles Hart stood at the head table, a wine glass raised in one hand and a self-satisfied smile in the other. The microphone had already been placed near him. Of course it had. Like someone just knew he couldn't resist a stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice booming with cheer and bourbon, "if I can steal just a few moments before dessert." The room chuckled lightly. People settled in. Caroline kept her back straight, her face neutral. "I just want to say how proud I am of my son. Jacob," he began. "From the moment he picked up a baseball bat that was twice his size, we all knew he had spirit, determination, and let's be honest, terrible balance." Laughter. Caroline watched Jacob, seated beside Emily, chuckle along, his arm looped protectively around his bride's chair. His smile was genuine, if slightly sheepish. "And Emily," Charles continued, lifting his glass towards her, "you've truly brought out the best in him. I mean, I never thought I'd see the day he'd willingly learn how to fold linen napkins." More laughter, louder this time. The toast flowed like a practised monologue, punchlines well-timed, sentiment carefully rationed. Caroline had heard this rhythm before. The centre of attention was a drug her father never stopped chasing. She reached for her water, sipping slowly, waiting for the pivot. It came right on cue. "And of course," Charles said, voice shifting ever so slightly, "we can't forget about my eldest, Caroline." Her name landed in the room like a dropped plate, sharp, unexpected, a note off key. A few people glanced her way. She gave a polite smile, the one she'd mastered through years of backhanded compliments and performative concern. Charles gestured grandly. "Now Caroline here. She's our soldier, our world traveller. You know, the army's got all sorts of things these days. Tech jobs, office roles, support positions. Turns out war's not just mud and bullets anymore." The air in the room cooled a degree. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Charles chuckled, oblivious. "Back in my day, soldiers were grunts with boots. But now, even the girls can join in. There's a place for everyone." And there it was. Caroline didn't move. Her expression didn't change, but inside something pressed like a thumb against her sternum. The words weren't new, but the setting, the microphone, the 100 eyes, the celebratory tone, it felt like being unwrapped and put on display, only to be laughed at. The kicker landed next. "I mean, it's great, right?" he said, raising his glass again. "Who says the army can't have a little lipstick?" Laughter, light and strained, but it didn't reach the head table. Emily's smile had frozen. Jacob had stopped chewing, and then slowly Jacob turned. He didn't speak, but the look he gave their father was enough to steal the air from the room. Caroline caught the moment in perfect clarity, Jacob's eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening, the kind of look that said, "You just crossed a line." The room didn't laugh after that. A hush fell, one that didn't quite recover. Charles seemed to realise it too late. His voice faltered. "Just trying to keep it light," he said, less confidently. Caroline felt Ramos shift beside her. Barrett's fingers tightened around his fork. Nguyen's eyes were locked forward, unblinking. Across the room, Caroline's mother sat stiffly, staring down at her napkin like it had betrayed her. Caroline didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The silence had already done it for her. The silence stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable. Not dramatic, not explosive, just stretched, like a wire pulled too tight. You could feel it in the air, the room waiting for someone to speak, someone to break the tension. But no one dared, not after that last line. Caroline stared straight ahead, her face unreadable. Her glass was still in her hand, though she hadn't taken a sip. Around her, subtle shifts began. Silverware lowered, chairs eased back. The hum of conversation didn't resume. It was Jacob who moved first. He stood slowly, deliberately, not clumsily, not performatively, just with intent. He reached for the mic his father had set down, and when Charles saw this, his smile faltered. He took a half step toward it, like he might interrupt, reclaim control. But something in Jacob's face stopped him cold. Jacob turned to face the room, not just the guests, but his father, his mother, the photographers, the MC, the groomsmen, and most of all, his sister. "I'd just like to add one thing," he said. His voice was calm, clear. He glanced at his bride, then back to the crowd. "All of my groomsmen," he said, "served under her." Gasps weren't audible, but there was a definite intake of breath, collective and unplanned. Caroline blinked once. The room turned as one, like compass needles swinging to true north. All eyes moved to table 10. Ramos was the first to rise. No words, no showmanship. He stood, squared his shoulders and saluted. A crisp, clean gesture, so practiced it felt inevitable. Barrett followed, then Guyen. Then the last two groomsmen, both former soldiers, both quiet until now, stood as one. 6 salutes, 6 bodies aligned in precision. The room held its breath. The sound was barely there, just the rustle of formal jackets, the soft snap of palms to brows. But it was louder than any toast could have ever been. Charles Hart froze. Then, as if perfectly timed by the universe itself, his hand jerked. His phone, sleek, shiny, brand new, slipped from his grip. It struck the edge of his wine glass, bounced off the table and clattered to the floor, loud, awkward, unrehearsed. The iPhone 16 spun like a coin before landing face up with a soft final thunk. The screen cracked. At that exact second, the DJ's background music, some slow instrumental intended to ease transitions, cut off mid-note. Silence. Real silence. It wasn't planned, not rehearsed, but it was perfect. Caroline didn't move. She didn't need to. Every pair of eyes was now on her. Not with pity, not with embarrassment, but with something else. Recognition. Respect. Even awe. She felt her breath return to her chest. Not shallow, not panicked. Just there, full and grounded. Jacob stepped away from the mic. His job was done. The groomsmen held their salutes for 3 full seconds more. Then one by one they dropped their hands and sat back down. No applause, no nods. Just the echo of their stance ringing through marble floors and linen-covered tables. Caroline didn't look at her father. She didn't need to. Whatever battle he'd been fighting in his head, whatever version of her he had tried to project, was now standing in front of 100 people, unshakable and saluted. No speech required. She glanced towards the bride. Emily was already clapping, quiet at first, then louder, pulling others with her. Like a slow wave, the room joined in, not for the toast, but for the truth. Caroline finally set her glass down. She didn't speak, she didn't smile, she just breathed. And for the first time that night, it felt like air. The music returned gradually, tentative at first, as if unsure whether it was safe to resume. A soft jazz instrumental filtered through the room, barely audible above the lingering echoes of what had just transpired. Caroline remained seated, her hands resting lightly on the tablecloth. She hadn't moved since the salutes. There was no need to. The moment had already done its work. It lived now in the silence that followed, in the breath people had been holding and didn't realise until they finally exhaled. Then the ripple began. It started with the photographer, who lowered her camera and crossed the floor, offering Caroline a firm, respectful nod. Then a cousin she hadn't spoken to since middle school, wide-eyed, almost sheepish, stepped forward, hand outstretched. Caroline rose to meet it, firm handshake returned. No words passed between them. None were needed. One by one, others followed. Guests from both sides of the family. Some who had never looked her way before, others who had always tilted their heads with polite scepticism. Now they came with open palms and genuine expressions. You made us proud tonight. I had no idea what you've done. You carry yourself like someone who's seen the world and still chooses to stand in it. The compliments felt strange, like trying on a jacket you didn't know belonged to you, but she accepted each one with quiet grace. Then came Emily. The bride reached her with red-rimmed eyes and arms already open. She pulled Caroline into a tight, trembling hug. I'm sorry, Emily whispered. I didn't know. About everything. I just didn't know. Caroline returned the embrace, steady and sure. You weren't supposed to. Today was about you. Emily pulled back just enough to look at her. It still is, because you showed me what strength really looks like. They stood there a moment longer, two women who had crossed a boundary neither had expected, linked now not by marriage but by understanding. Caroline stepped back towards her table and noticed someone standing off to the side, watching hesitant. It was Aunt Margaret, the same aunt who had once dismissed Caroline's military talk at a barbecue as tomboy nonsense, who had patted her hand during her first leave and said, Well, I hope you're done playing army now. Now she stood with her back straight, her purse clutched in both hands, expression unreadable. Caroline tilted her head slightly, acknowledging her. Then slowly, deliberately, Aunt Margaret lifted her hand, not for a wave, not for applause, for a salute. It wasn't perfect. It was a little too slow, a little too formal, but it was unmistakable. Caroline's chest tightened. Twist landed soft but deep. Aunt Margaret held the gesture for 3 seconds, then dropped it and turned away, dabbing at her eye with a handkerchief as she disappeared into the crowd. Caroline stood there. The image burned into her memory. She hadn't expected tears, not from Margaret, not from anyone. But something had shifted tonight, something more than redemption, more than validation. It was legacy. She looked around the room one last time. Her eyes found Jacob, who stood beside Emily, watching her with that same quiet reverence he used to have as a kid, when she'd come home from deployment and handed him a military patch. He nodded once. You did it, the gesture said. Not revenge, just truth, standing taller than the man who tried to diminish it. The reception dwindled as night draped its quiet over the venue. The crowd thinned. Old friends exchanging hugs, kids slipping off their shoes, relatives searching for to-go boxes like scavengers on a well-dressed battlefield. Caroline stayed until the end, helping her mother gather stray programmes, stacking empty chairs without being asked. No one told her to, no one expected her to, but that had never mattered to her anyway. When she finally stepped out into the parking lot, the air was cool and damp, thick with the scent of wet grass and the distant hint of autumn. Her heels clicked softly on the asphalt as she moved towards her rental, the lights dim behind her like a curtain falling on the final act. She was halfway to the car when she heard footsteps, measured, familiar. She didn't turn. Charles Hart stood a few paces behind her, hands tucked in the pockets of his suit jacket, shoulders curved in a way that betrayed age he never admitted to. Caroline, he said. She turned slowly. They stood under a flickering light post. The world around them was empty, quiet, no more eyes, no more audience, no microphones to catch every syllable, just the two of them. He opened his mouth like he had something prepared, some carefully folded speech full of barbed compliments or conditional praise, but whatever he had planned seemed to unravel in the air between them. He rubbed the back of his neck, then looked at her car, then at the ground. Drive safe, he said finally. That was it. Not an apology, not an explanation. Just 3 words, a safety warning as hollow as a weather report. Caroline didn't flinch, didn't nod, but she didn't cry either. She just looked at him. Looked through him, perhaps, for the first time as a man, not a myth. A man shaped by fear and pride, too brittle to bend, too stubborn to break. Then she gave the smallest of nods. Not forgiveness, not permission, just closure. She turned, opened her door, and drove away without another glance. The highway was mostly empty. Just long ribbons of blacktop lit by twin beams of headlights. Rain began to fall. Not heavy, just a soft mist that made the world shimmer. Caroline let it wash the static from her mind. Her hands stayed steady on the wheel. The further she drove, the lighter she felt, not like she was letting go of something, but like something was finally letting go of her. By the time she reached her small rental cabin outside of town, the rain had slowed to a whisper. She parked beneath a crooked tree and stepped inside, welcomed by the quiet creak of floorboards and the faint smell of pine and old wood. The lights were off, except for the soft yellow glow coming from the kitchen. On the counter, propped against a chipped ceramic bowl, was a package, a simple manila envelope, no postage, just her name written in blocky, familiar handwriting. Caroline. She stared at it for a long moment before peeling it open. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, folded in thirds. She unfolded it slowly, almost ritualistically, expecting nothing. But there it was. Caroline. I don't know how to say the things I should have said a long time ago, so I'll say this. I was wrong. You are not what I feared. You are not what I tried to shrink or dismiss. You are what I never dared imagine a daughter could be. I didn't know how to raise someone stronger than me. You showed me something tonight, not with words, but by standing taller than I ever allowed you to. There's still a lot I don't know how to fix, but I saw you tonight, really saw you. And I'm sorry it took this long. Dad Caroline stood in the quiet kitchen, letter trembling slightly in her fingers. She didn't weep, didn't smile. She folded the letter, set it beside her keys, and poured a glass of water. Outside, the rain began again, this time louder, steadier. She stood by the window, sipping slowly, letting the words settle. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was carrying everything alone. She had been seen, and that was enough.